By every rule of American geography, this stretch of coastline should be one of the most powerful corridors on the continent. It sits between two of the most productive economies on Earth, California to the south, the Pacific Northwest to the north. It holds ancient forests, a volcanic mountain range, rivers that run to the Pacific, and farmland so fertile it once fed the entire nation's appetite for gold. It should be a megalopolis. It should rival the eastern seaboard. Instead, it's almost completely empty. Between San Francisco and Portland lies over 600 miles of American coast, and almost nobody lives there. So how did the most geographically gifted stretch of the West become the one place America completely forgot? And here's what makes this stranger still. The people who do live here, the loggers, the farmers, the ranchers scattered across these mountains, they didn't just accept being forgotten. They tried to leave, not the land, their states. At one point, this region declared its own governor, designed its own flag, and named a state that doesn't officially exist to this day. We'll get to that in a moment, but first, we need to understand what geography did to this place before politics ever could. Look at a map of the American West Coast and trace your finger from Los Angeles northward. You pass through the urban machine of the Bay Area, 7 million people, the engine of the global tech economy. Keep going. The land opens up. The coast gets wilder. The mountains get closer to the water. You pass Eureka, Crescent City, cross into Oregon, Grants Pass, Medford, Ashland, small towns, long distances between them, and then finally Portland, 600 miles. The population of that entire corridor? About 2.5 million people. You could fit that into a single Los Angeles suburb. For comparison, the eastern seaboard fits 50 million people into roughly the same distance. Miami to Boston, densely stacked, city after city, port after port. So what went wrong on the west? Nothing went wrong. That's what makes this story so fascinating. The geography here didn't fail. It simply refused to cooperate. You see, when Americans moved west in the 1800s, they weren't just chasing land. They were chasing accessible land. And accessibility, in the 19th century, meant one thing above everything else: rivers you could use. The Columbia River, which flows from modern-day British Columbia all the way to the Pacific at Portland, was an absolute geographic gift. It carved a navigable highway through the Cascade Mountains, giving settlers a way in and a way to ship goods out. Portland didn't become a city because it was beautiful. It became a city because the Columbia forced civilization to happen there. San Francisco had the same logic. The Bay, one of the largest natural harbors in the world, could receive ships from the Pacific and funnel goods inland. When gold was discovered in 1848 and 300,000 people flooded into Northern California, San Francisco had the geographic infrastructure to absorb that shock. A bay that deep, that wide, that protected, that's not a port, that's a geographic cheat code. But in between, the coast becomes something else entirely. The Northern California and Southern Oregon coastline is genuinely stunning. Towering sea stacks rise out of the Pacific like ancient monuments. Redwoods, the tallest living things on Earth, crowd the cliffs. The sea is cold, deep, biologically rich, and almost completely hostile to human settlement. This coast doesn't just lack good harbors, it actively resists them. The continental shelf drops away fast, the surf is violent year-round, and the river mouths that do reach the ocean, the Rogue, the Eel, the Klamath, are too shallow, too sediment-choked, too unpredictable to support major port infrastructure. You could drop the entire port of Seattle into the mouth of the Rogue River, and it would ground itself in the shallows within a mile. That's not hyperbole. That's the geography. Inland, it's no simpler. Between the Sierra Nevada to the east and the Cascade Range to the north, the terrain is a relentless series of ridges, valleys, and volcanic highlands. Mount Shasta, 14,179 feet, still monitored today, as a very high threat for volcanic eruption, dominates the skyline like a warning. The USGS doesn't just track it historically, they track it now, actively. Because it isn't done. And unlike the Willamette Valley to the north, that glacially carved flatland that the Missoula floods filled with some of the most fertile soil in North America, this region has no equivalent gift. No great valley, no great river, no great harbor. What it has, instead, is something harder to monetize. Extraordinary, almost violent beauty. Crater Lake sits at the heart of this region. 7,700 years ago, a volcano called Mount Mazama erupted so catastrophically that its entire summit collapsed inward, leaving a caldera that slowly filled with snowmelt over centuries. The result is the deepest lake in the United States. Water so clear, so intensely blue, it looks digitally altered. It isn't. This is the paradox of the empty West. It's not empty because it's barren. It's empty because it's too much, too rugged, too vertical, too volcanic, too far from the geographic logic that built American cities. Here's where history compounds the geography. In January 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall was building a sawmill for John Sutter on the American River, just east of modern Sacramento, when he noticed something glinting in the water. What happened next would reshape the entire American West in under a decade. 300,000 people flooded into Northern California. San Francisco exploded from 200 residents to 36,000 in 6 years. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, stitched California to the rest of the nation. The Homestead Act of 1860 gave settlers 160 acres of free land. By 1934, 270 million acres had been distributed, mostly through the West. And the Oregon Trail brought its own wave. Between 1841 and 1869, more than 400,000 settlers, miners, and farmers walked over 2,000 miles from Missouri to reach the Willamette Valley. That valley, remember, the one the floods built, was so fertile, so navigable, that it practically pulled people toward it by gravity. You see the pattern. The gold rush funneled people south, to the Bay, to Sacramento, to the Sierra Nevada foothills. The Oregon Trail funneled people north, to the Willamette, to Portland, to Puget Sound. The 600 miles in between, both arrows flew right past it. The empty West wasn't a destination, it was a gap, and once the infrastructure calcified, railroads going north-south along the coast, highways following the same corridors decades later, the gap hardened into permanence. But here's what I haven't told you yet. The people who ended up here, the ones who stayed in the gap, didn't take being ignored quietly. And what they did about it reveals something important about how geography shapes not just cities, but identity. We'll get there. First, a word from today's sponsor. The empty West has always had a problem with invisible borders. The counties of Northern California and Southern Oregon sit inside their states on every map, but their interests, their resources, their political reality might as well be in a different country. Politically invisible, geographically isolated. And here's the thing, in the digital world, the opposite problem exists. You think you're invisible, but you're not. Data brokers are mapping you, your address, your phone number, your employment history, your family, and selling that map to anyone who wants it. November 27th, 1941. On a highway outside the small town of Eureka, California, a group of armed men set up a roadblock. They weren't criminals. They were farmers, ranchers, and county officials, and they handed out a proclamation to every driver who stopped. We, the citizens of the great state of Jefferson, hereby proclaim our secession from California and Oregon. They'd already inaugurated a governor. They'd designed a flag, a gold pan on a field of green, stamped with 2 X's. Those X's meant double-crossed. Double-crossed by Sacramento, double-crossed by Salem. 2 state capitals, hundreds of miles away, run by urban majorities who had no reason to care about mountain roads, timber rights, or water access in a region most of their constituents had never visited. The movement took the name Jefferson after Thomas Jefferson, the president who dreamed of a nation of independent agrarian republics. The irony is almost too perfect. Jefferson, the man who authorized the Louisiana Purchase that started westward expansion, now invoked by the people that same expansion had left behind. They were this close. Newspapers were covering it nationally. Congressional murmurs were starting. The geography, straddling 2 states, economically coherent, culturally distinct, actually made a reasonable case. Then, 10 days later, Pearl Harbor. The roadblocks came down. The nation had larger borders to worry about, and the state of Jefferson was quietly folded back into history, officially, at least. Because it never actually died. In recent decades, Jefferson has re-emerged, not as a novelty, but as a political pressure movement. County supervisors have passed resolutions. State of Jefferson license plates appear on trucks in Siskiyou County. The grievances are identical to 1,941. Land use, water rights, taxation without proportional representation, and the endless frustration of being rural in a state governed by its cities. The largest city in this entire 600-mile corridor is Eugene, Oregon, 380,000 people in its metro. That's roughly 1/17 the size of the Portland metro. The next largest, Medford, Oregon, at 223,000. Then Chico, California, at 211,000. Bend, Oregon, the fastest growing small city in the country for the past decade, at just under 100,000. An entire American region, the size of multiple European nations, governed by cities it can barely see on a map. So we come back to the question, how did the most geographically gifted stretch of the West become the one place America forgot? The answer is that geography is never just about what's there. It's about what's next to what's there. The empty West had volcanoes but no harbor, rivers but no flatland, forests but no navigable corridor to the Pacific. It had everything, and the one thing it lacked made everything else irrelevant. When the gold rush and the Oregon Trail carved the permanent channels of Western civilization south toward San Francisco, north toward Portland, the empty West wasn't left behind by accident. It was structurally bypassed. The infrastructure followed the geography. The population followed the infrastructure. And after that, the gap fed itself. But here is the reframe.
If we look closely at the map,
The state of Jefferson failed because geography isolated it. And the state of Jefferson survives because geography isolated it. The people who live in this corridor, the ones who stayed in the gap, didn't stay because they had no choice. They stayed because this exact emptiness, this exact ruggedness, this exact distance from the urban machine is the point. Bend didn't become the fastest growing city in the country because it built a port. It grew because a generation of Americans looked at the empty West and saw something that had been stripped out of everywhere else: space, silence, mountains that don't have a Starbucks at the summit yet. The empty West wasn't sacrificed by history. It was preserved by geography. Whether that's a tragedy or a gift depends entirely on where you're standing when you ask. If this corner of America interests you, the story of how the American West was carved up by water, specifically the catastrophic Missoula floods that built the Willamette Valley and sent civilization north instead of south, is genuinely one of the most dramatic geological events in the last 20,000 years. I've got a video on that, and I think you'll find it changes how you look at every city in the Pacific Northwest. Because here's the thing about the Missoula floods, they didn't just happen once. They happened over 40 times, and each time, they rewrote the map.